Hello, friends. Is there life beyond the grave? The Bible assures us that there is, and that is good because more than 150,000 people die every 24 hours. Why is this? Must death continue forever to mar the happiness of the human race? The Bible tells us that a time is coming when there shall be no more death. Will this be literally true? Is death itself to die? This presentation includes the experience of a young girl who has lost her parents in death, and she wants to know the meaning of it all. Her aunt tries to comfort her and finally invites an old friend to talk things over with her. So now let's get on with the program.
This was the day I had promised to give to my niece Holly. For the first time since her mother died, Holly could smile a little, and she could feel a child's joy in going to the fair to be among people again. I hoped it would help her, although I knew I could never replace Holly's relationship to her own mother. So we joined the crowds of people gathering at the fair. I got to thinking how each person carried, like so many shadows, the memories of his own suffering when death struck down some member of the family. Doubtless each one remembered the frustration which followed such an experience, the fear, the helplessness. People, what an endless parade marching across the earth century after century, and all die. That's the end of the march. Or is it? All those faces, each different, each separate, each concerned with his own destiny, his own sense of happiness or despair. Many wonder what their final destiny will be. From childhood, we are led into this world by the guiding and presumably all protective hands of our parents. And we join the parade, the endless parade, the people's parade that keeps on coming, endlessly being born. For what? Merely to join the march from the cradle to the grave? Where is God in all this? The people keep coming, keep dreaming the same dreams and hopes over and over again. It makes one wonder. What does it matter when another human life is snuffed out? Does God care? Or are we just shadows on the earth? Rich, poor, kings, dictators, generals, all shadows. I took Holly to the children's playground, and I think how most children do not ask where life comes from and where it's gone when it's ended. But for Holly, I knew these questions were moving about in her mind, and soon I would have to talk to her and give her answers. Answers I did not know myself. For a moment, I would like to forget the grown-up questions. I would like to feel a child's joy in just moving, the joy of going from one place to another, faster and faster. That same drive that stays with them as adults, the drive to go faster and faster, something in their nature that says, go, go, go. Go on a swing and land on a cloud. How simple is life and the belief in God for children, until the balloons of their childhood burst like they burst for Holly and me. And the smiling clown-like look of life becomes the grin of grief. Childhood. How we give it away so easily and reach for it again so vainly, discovering that we cannot turn around in our march toward the grave. the merry-go-round with its unforgettable memories. Never again would anything in life quite equal the whirl and the magic of that merry machine with its flashing bulbs like so many stars. We sailed through space, the music racing through our ears, the horses bouncing with joy beneath us. This was like our childhood dream of heaven. We thought that on this earth could be nothing but joy. Then we did not anticipate pain and trouble and death. As a child, I believed in it, believed that it was as real as the music, as real as the colored lights, like stars that blurred across my eyes. But that was not really heaven on earth. Now the dream was lost, faded with the music, all gone. Yes, all gone. To what? I asked myself. Nothing? It cannot be that we're just creatures of nature living out the blind destiny that evolutionists talk about. We must be different than the flowers and the plants that grow and blossom and die. The human drama with its agony and its ecstasy, where do we find the key to its meaning? We search always for something that will explain it all. We search for the meaning of the greatest story ever told. We ask ourselves, what is man that a supreme being would be mindful of him? Our statues look like men, but men cannot make them come alive. Only God can do that. But will he do it for those who have died? We put on shows full of pomp and circumstance, but all they do is to remind us how vain man is. I think it was Solomon who said, all is vanity. All indeed is vanity, and striving after nothing. What is the message? Even the most primitive tribe could beat it out in their own way, with their own gods, the gods they fear. And they fear death too, for after death they think there is no hope. But man never quits his search, never stops climbing through the mysteries of his world. It is a groping search, and ever he wants to know what, if anything, lies beyond death. How much more knowledge will men be able to unlock? But what is the point of it unless it is leading to a solution of the greatest mystery of all, the mystery of death? We watch the parade of progress and we wonder if there really is progress. So with these conflicting thoughts, what kind of a message can I give to Holly when I do not have the message myself? I can tell her there's progress. But what is progress? More speed and more knowledge? I can tell her that we're moving toward some special goal. Yes, it is that goal that I must make clear to her. But I must first make it clear to myself. I must make it clear that we are not helpless victims of society's crimes, that there is an overruling providence that shapes our destinies. I must make it clear to her that we are not victims of the beat in human nature that wants to blow up civilization. I must make it clear that God has provided the answer concerning life and death and what comes after death, and that we will be able to understand when he gives us the key. And so on my way home along the countryside, and then along the iron tracks, I get ready to bring up the subject that I know is in Holly's mind. Holly?
Yeah?
How are you feeling? You had quite a day.
My feet are so tired.
I guess we tried to see too many things in one day. Why don't you take off your shoes and give your feet a chance to rest?
Feels much better. Gee, there certainly were a lot of people at the fair today.
Ah, yeah.
Might have come from all over the world.
I guess they did.
I wish Mom and Dad could have been with me today. It just would have been so much fun.
Oh, I know.
It doesn't seem right. Why did God allow it, Aunt Jean? Why?
He had his reasons.
But what reasons could they be?
I don't know. God's ways are his own ways.
Well, that doesn't sound like a very good reason. I mean, why couldn't it have happened to Freddie Hoffman's mother and father, or Donald Sisk's mother and father? What did I do wrong to have it happen to me?
Well, if it had happened to Donald Sisk's mother and father, he'd be asking why it hadn't happened to your mother and father. Holly?
Yeah?
When you go to school, at least when I went to school, growing up seemed somehow a game in which everything was questions and answers. Growing up seemed somehow a game where you learn the answers to questions, or the answers are always to be found in a book. You learn how to add and how to subtract and how to make sentences, how to remember dates, and how to think. And somehow, as you grow older, you imagine that there's a time when grown-ups will have learned all the answers to things, but then you begin to discover a strange thing. You begin to realize that even if you were grown up, there would still be questions. And to many of them, there would be no answers. And that becomes a very discouraging thing.
But aren't all the answers somewhere in some library, some book, if you only knew where to find them?
No, Holly. I wish it were that easy, but it isn't.
Well, now, you take my question as to why I had to lose my mother and father. Who would have the answer?
Only God, and he gives us those answers in his book, the Bible.
Are all the answers in the Bible?
Yes. That is, all the answers concerning death and its meaning.
That reminds me, Aunt Jean, of a friend of my father and mother. He said that the Bible was a book of wonders.
And he was right.
And I remember that this friend explained many things to my parents. I was younger then and don't really remember much about it, except that when he was through, I felt so very happy.
I have a great idea. I know a man named Mr. Fay who's a student of the Bible. I don't know which church he belongs to. Perhaps the same one your parents' friend did. But he's made it his life's work to study the Bible. I think I'll ask him to come over after dinner for coffee and dessert. He once said that he'd like to come and talk with us about these things. Will that be okay with you, Holly?
Sure, that'll be fine.
I'm very glad you invited me over to have coffee and cake with you.
Yeah, we always enjoy having you with us. This time I had a special reason for inviting you. Holly, as you know, is my niece. Her parents were killed in an accident not too long ago. And this experience has left her very much confused. Although young, she's trying to relate what has happened to God. Why he allowed it. Oh, you know, all the questions which arise at such times, even with grown-ups. Mr. Fay, I hope you can help the both of us. I need it as much as Holly does.
Mr. Fay, please tell me about my father and mother. Why did they have to die? Are they alive now in heaven? Are they happy? Can they see me now and hear me? Will we meet again?
Holly, darling, not all at once. You see, Mr. Fay, Holly's more than a little disturbed.
That's quite all right. Her feelings are quite understandable, and under the circumstances, natural.
I'm glad you understand, Mr. Fay.
Holly, you ask why your father and mother had to die.
That wasn't my only question, Mr. Fay.
Please, Holly, try not to interrupt Mr. Fay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay, Holly. Now, I'll do my best to answer all your questions, but one at a time. Your first question was why your father and mother had to die. I think it's important to get that question answered first. Holly, your parents had to die because they were members of a fallen and dying race. At the present time, everybody has to die sooner or later, and some sooner and some later, but all are dying.
But why is this so, Mr. Fay? All know what you say is true, but why?
The only answer I have comes from the Bible. I believe in the Bible account of man's creation in the image of God. I believe, just as the Bible says, that the Creator placed a test of obedience upon man, and that in this test he failed, that he disobeyed God's law and came under condemnation to death, just as God had forewarned. God had said, you remember, if you disobey, thou shalt surely die.
Mr. Fay, my father and mother did not disobey God. They were good people. They were kind to everybody.
Oh, Holly, I know they must have been. As I said, man was created in the image of God, and that God-like image of goodness and love still shows through in the case of the majority of people. However, the penalty of death was inherited by Adam's children and is passed on to the entire human race.
Mr. Fay, taking the Bible literally, are we to understand that if our first parents had not disobeyed the Creator, they could have continued to live in the Garden of Eden and would not have died at all?
That's right, Mrs. Cavrell. Death is the penalty for sin. And without sin, there would have been no death in human experience.
I can see that point all right, but somehow I've always thought that death was merely an escape from earthly life and a getaway to a heavenly life. How could anyone go to heaven if they don't die?
Let me emphasize that death is not a gateway to heaven. If it were, then death would be a friend. But the Bible declares that death is an enemy. And I think that is evident from the way that Holly has been disturbed by it.
I see what you mean. But, Mr. Fay, I'm afraid you'll have to explain a little further.
Well, as I've said, God told our first parents that death would be the penalty for disobedience. Thou shalt surely die, is the way he stated it to Adam. But the fallen Lucifer, impersonating a serpent, said to Mother Eve, ye shall not surely die.
That was a lie, wasn't it, Mr. Fay?
Of course it was a lie. But Eve was deceived by it. And the vast majority of mankind has ever since been deceived by it. From that lie have come all the theories of heathen religions which imply that when a person dies, he's not really dead. Satan said, he shall not surely die. And the modern version of that is, there is no death.
You're saying, then, that when a person dies, he's really dead?
That's what the Bible teaches. The Bible says, the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything.
Does that mean that there is no hope for a future life?
No, Mrs. Cavrell, it doesn't mean that. Jesus said that all in their graves would come forth in the resurrection. You see, while God sentenced mankind to death, he still loved the people and sent his beloved Son to redeem them from death. Jesus took the sinner's place in death. In other words, Father Adam was perfect. He disobeyed. He was condemned to death and all his children in him. Before God could release him from death, he required another perfect man to take his place in death. And Jesus had his life transferred to earth as a perfect man, uncondemned, to die in Adam's place. This provided what the Bible calls a ransom. Because of this ransom, mankind will be released from death in what the Bible calls the resurrection of the dead.
And there will be a future life because the power of God will restore the dead to life. Just where, then, would you say the dead are in the meantime?
That was one of my questions, Mr. Fay. Where is my father and mother?
And I remembered your question, Holly. And the Bible has a beautiful answer. Because those who have died are to be restored to life, the Bible speaks to them as being asleep. The Bible calls it the sleep of death. And Jesus referred to a young girl who had died, saying, the maid is not dead, but sleepeth.
That's a beautiful way of saying it. You see, Holly, your mother and father are just sleeping, and by God will awaken them from sleep. And will that be right here on earth, Mr. Fay?
That's right. God created the earth to be man's eternal home, and he created man to be the king of earth.
Are you implying that no one ever goes to heaven?
Oh, no, I don't mean that. There are in the Bible what we might speak of as heavenly promises. These promises are made to the faithful footstep followers of Jesus who lay down their lives in sacrifice as he did.
So the heavenly promises of the Bible, as you call them, do not reflect God's plan for mankind as a whole. Have I caught your thought?
Mr. Fay, why did God allow my father and mother to go to sleep in death so early? Did they displease him?
No, Holly, I don't think your father and mother did anything specially to displease God. The penalty of death is resting upon all mankind, and all are dying. Some did as children, and some live to a ripe old age, and others die in between. This variation is as nothing when compared with the eternity of joy which God has provided for mankind when awakened from the sleep of death.
I like that explanation, Mr. Fay. There are good people who get along well, and the same is true with respect to many wicked people. On the other hand, there are many good people who have a hard time in life and get killed, perhaps, as Holly's parents did. And this also is true of many wicked people. If we should try to think of God entering into all these individual cases, it would be most confusing, don't you think?
Indeed it would, Mrs. Cavrell. As I said, God is allowing things to work out largely as they will during this reign of evil and death which man has brought upon himself. Meanwhile, however, he is preparing to awaken all from the sleep of death and give them an opportunity to obey him and live in peace and happiness forever.
Does that mean that God does not now overrule in the affairs of anyone at the present time?
No, it doesn't mean that at all. God does overrule in the affairs of his own people. He sees to it that they get just those experiences they need to prepare them for the position they will occupy in the future blessing of all the families of the earth.
And the Bible teaches that all the families of the earth are ultimately to be blessed.
Yes, Mrs. Cavrell. God made a promise just like that to faithful Abraham. He said to Abraham, "In thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed." And the New Testament explains that Christ is that promised seed of Abraham.
You know, Mr. Fay, I get the feeling that there will be a lot of people to be awakened from the sleep of death to receive the promised blessings. Today, Holly and I visited the fair, and I was never so impressed with the vast number of people there are. We stood aside for a bit and watched the crowd go by. There was no end to it. They came from everywhere. People, people, people.
And God loves them all and is working out a plan for their future blessing. That work of blessing will be accomplished through the agencies of Christ's kingdom, which is to be established here on the earth. And the Bible declares that he will reign until all enemies are conquered, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death.
Mr. Fay, does that mean that the time will come on this earth when people will actually stop dying by accident or any other cause?
Yes, it does, Mrs. Cabral. The Bible says that there shall be no more pain, no more tears, no more death. And you know, what that means is that death itself must die.
Oh, Aunt Jean, I'm so glad you invited Mr. Fay over to talk with us. I feel just great now, for now I know that someday I will see Mom and Dad again.
Who can blame Holly for feeling great over the prospects of seeing her mom and dad again? There is nothing that can steal the bitter from life's woes so well as God's great plan for the blessing of all mankind through an awakening from the sleep of death. And friends, we would like to share more of the details of this hope with you by sending you a copy of the little book, Hope Beyond the Grave, without cost or obligation of any kind. What is death? Is the soul immortal? Will we know our loved ones in the resurrection? Where is heaven? What is paradise? These are but a few samples of the questions you will find answered in the little book, Hope Beyond the Grave.
To view the booklet online, visit www.dawnbible.com, or to receive a hard copy of the booklet by mail, send us your name and postal mailing address and ask for the booklet by name. The title of the booklet for this program is Hope Beyond the Grave. Send an email to dawnbible@aol.com. The booklet will be mailed to you free and without obligation. And now, goodbye, and may God bless you.